It has recently been announced that the great artist David Lynch, really well known for being a filmmaker, but really just an amazing artist, has sadly passed away. And I wanted just to acknowledge this moment and also do a little tribute to David Lynch, who, if you've seen a previous video of mine on my favourite films, had a film included in there, and I think I mentioned he is and was my favourite filmmaker of all time. A singular visionary talent. Nothing comes close to the kind of imagination, I think, of David Lynch. Now, we'll look at his films, I think, and we'll just have a sort of summary of how I feel about his films, and I'll have a few anecdotes I've heard about David Lynch over the years that I think just nice, and just really celebrate such an extraordinary artist. And maybe if you haven't seen his films and like films, as you know, this is a Linux channel. If you're looking for Linux videos, obviously I do plenty of Linux videos, but sometimes I make videos like this, and this seems to be an important moment for a video like this. Hope that makes sense. So, no Linux today, just unfiltered David Lynch magic. So, yeah, let's have a look at some of David Lynch's films. So, as you can see, I've got the Wikipedia page up here, and there's a picture of David there from 1990. That would have been when he probably won the Palme d'Or for Wild at Heart, and one of the films we'll look at. Palme d'Or is the Cannes Film Festival award for best film, basically. Or it could have been maybe the Oscars, although that'd probably been 91. Anyway, I digress. Let's not worry about that. I'm not necessarily going to cover his upbringing or anything like this. Let's just focus on film in this video. Okay. So I've got a list of his films. We are not doing IMDb. IMDb is too painful to navigate these days, and all about JavaScript. So it's just a headache. Let's just use IMDb, and we'll look at these films. So, and his TV of work, of course. So the first film was Eraserhead. Now, interestingly, Eraserhead was purely self-financed, I believe. Well, maybe he got a grant. I think he got a couple of grants, and it took him many years to make. Over, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, maybe longer. Pretty much done exclusively from his own hand, with very few people aboard. Jack Nance, I believe, is the lead character. Now, you'll find with David Lynch films, if you're not familiar with them, I'm not going to try and explain the synopsis of a David Lynch film necessarily, or usually it's not easy to, because David Lynch is really a surrealist master. I think, you know, Salvador Dali, or you shouldn't know my surrealist artist, but not even that. Just a great visionary, more than any genre, I would say. So, of artist, but very much in a surrealist sort of vein. Anyway, so Eraserhead was not the first David Lynch film I saw, but when I saw it, absolutely fantastic, extraordinarily strange, a real trip. What can you say? What can you say? But just watch it. Just watch it. I think, interestingly, Stanley Kubrick, the great filmmaker, when he saw this film, had an opinion that really David Lynch was one of the few filmmakers back then, so this would have been in the late 70s, who he really was interested in. A lot of other film and filmmakers it wasn't so interested in. David Lynch was one that really impressed him. So just something to think about there. So already on his first film. So really from there he built up a sort of cult following, because I think it was a film that was shown on midnight circuits, and other filmmakers became aware of this singular visionary talent. And then his next film was The Elephant Man, which really propelled him into filmmaking stardom. It was actually nominated for a number of Academy Awards, and as you can see, this little synopsis here was loosely based on the life of Joseph Merrick. So he was a Victorian man who effectively became like a circus act. And the film, again, you might have guessed, like Eraserhead, is in black and white, visually fantastic as David Lynch films are. Interesting, it was I think you can see here it says about Mel Brooks. Mel Brooks, interestingly, wanted to fund a David Lynch film because he was so impressed by David Lynch. Again, already he had made such an impression, and it's got great actors, and it's got, I think it's John Hurt plays John Merrick. I think it's John Hurt. You've got Anthony Hopkins, of course, playing like somebody who's trying to help him. And if you're not crying by the end of that film, there's clearly something wrong with you. It's just fantastic film, absolutely beautiful. And so here we go. Where do we go from here with David Lynch? Well, this is where it got a bit interesting. This will be the first anecdote I will give about David Lynch that he spoke about. A very amusing story. As you see here, between The Elephant Man and Dune, he was offered the directing job of Star Wars 3. Now, I think that's what was that called? Return of the Jedi. Because by then George Lucas had directed the first of the Star Wars films and then passed the directing duties on to others. So Empire Strikes Back was somebody I can't remember off the top of my head, and then same with Return of the Jedi. I can't remember who actually ended up directing it, but he had offered it to David Lynch. David Lynch's agent suggested to David that he go and meet George Lucas. Just go and meet him, see what you think. David wasn't really keen on this. He was very much about his own thing. So he got there, and George was showing him all these little models about weird creatures in the Star Wars world. And anyway, by the end of it, he tenuously agreed, was sort of overwrought by George Lucas's attention and the sort of madness, but he started basically having palpitations, and he phoned his agent, and he just started speaking to his agent saying, this guy's got all these weird creatures, he's talking to me about Jabba this and something that, and I just can't do this thing, I just can't do this film. And the agent was like, oh, okay, don't do it then, basically. But just an amusing little thing that George Lucas was talking about all these weird characters, and David Lynch was having basically a panic attack, thinking, what had he got himself into? So, kind of ironic then that David Lynch ended up directing Dune, well, which is really would have been funded really as a direct response to the popularity of Star Wars. Possibly, it obviously had an influence, and it was going to be a huge epic. Now, the recent Dune films have been very successful. They're like a space opera. So David Lynch obviously thought that he needed to stick with Hollywood studios and fulfill some sort of promise to them and still make a singular vision. And this is where really he bashed heads with certain powerful people, because when Dune was offered to him, he clearly had his own vision for it. And his vision was not the studio's vision, and I think there were a lot of issues on set. In the end, he disowned the film, and it became an Alan Smithy film, which is really a pseudonym for directors who disown their work. Really, the final cut we'll never truly know. I have seen a director's cut, which is really David's as close to what footage existed of his vision, but I think again he probably made a lot of compromises in making the film in the first place. That being said, it's still a sort of strange film. Has a fantastic soundtrack by Toto, and just sort of beautiful, really. Such a epic. However, it's not the greatest film. I mean, if you're a die-hard Dune fanatic, maybe this is good for you. Maybe it's a huge disappointment because it's not closely related to the books. I don't know. I haven't seen the new Dune film, so I don't know how they compare. but I quite liked it. It's interesting to watch. Has Carl McLachlan in, who obviously is most famous with Twin Peaks with David Lynch, which we'll cover in a moment. So just this is really where David went back already to his roots of filmmaking, making very strange, not necessarily blockbuster pictures, let's say. Very much going back to true David Lynch territory. And a couple years later he had Blue Velvet, retained Carl McLachlan, and has Isabella Rossellini, Dennis Hopper's in it, Laura Dern, and it's named after the song Blue Velvet. And really this is true David Lynch, and again I can't truly explain narratively the film, but on the face of it, it is looking at suburban America. I think it's contemporary, I can't remember. I don't think it's actually set in the 1950s, but it's basically looking under suburban America, the pristine lawns, the happy families, and getting into the grubby underneath. And Dennis Hopper's sort of unforgettableness is a sort of madman, psychotic character called, I think it's Frank Booth. Amazing performance, very disturbing. It's a magnificent film, a masterpiece. Visually, the music, the acting, it's just beautiful. What a film. And so really this is where we see, David Lynch back to his true form. And then we have Wild at Heart. Now interestingly, I think Wild at Heart is still appreciated, but it's not necessarily the most talked about David Lynch film. However, it did win the Palme d'Or, arguably his most successful film at awards, at the award ceremonies, maybe except for Mulholland Drive. Has Nicolas Cage, kind of being Nicolas Cage, but moulded for David Lynch. So it's like a partnership in heaven, really. Perfectly aligned. Really, if you think of any of Nicolas Cage's recent films, they're not so out of Nicolas Cage character. I mean, he has been doing this stuff for a long time, but it just seems absolutely natural that he would behave the way he does in a David Lynch film. Doesn't feel forced that maybe some Nicolas Cage characters do. And when I say Nicolas Cage characters, I mean Nicolas Cage playing Nicolas Cage, as you know. No, he's great. I'm not being a downer on Nicolas Cage. I like a lot of his films. So, and I'll just give a shout out to Mandy. If you've never seen Mandy, that is another masterpiece. A very strange film. Anyway, so Wild at Heart is really like also a bit of an ode to the Wizard of Oz in a strange way, but it's sort of a surreal dream of a film, and just fantastic, with lots of unforgettable moments. William Dafoe being psychotic. What gets better than William Dafoe and Nicolas Cage being psychotic in one film, with honourable mentions to a small cameo by Jack Nance, who was in Elephant Man, doing this very strange scene with magic, and it's just great, really great film. So pleased David got his Palme d'Or for that, because it's a really good film. So then, really, the whole world is at his feet. Now, this is where he went into television, and he made, I'm interrupting myself here and going down to Twin Peaks. So really I'm only going to focus on Twin Peaks related television here. He did a couple of other things, but Twin Peaks is arguably his most famous work, and of course it's a television series, not a film. And really, what can you say about Twin Peaks? It's just a whole trip, really. The second series is slightly disappointing, and of course when I'm talking about Twin Peaks, I'm just talking about the first two series. It did return some years later, which I will come back to. But those first two series were incredibly popular. Like I say, the second series, not so much. And again, it's just... I think what's interesting with Twin Peaks is it's typically David Lynch, but it includes so much drama, so many little storylines, and packaged together is just fantastic. A great experience. Horrific, beautiful, fascinating, intoxicating. So many adjectives you could give to Twin Peaks. Fantastic. So if I go back up to films, this is then when he made a film called Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. Now this wasn't so successful. It was really seen as a disappointment, unfortunately, by some people. I do, however, like it, but I can see why people were disappointed. It's again typically David Lynch. I think what's interesting with Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, he had a singular vision really to separate the TV series from the film, and it kind of takes some elements of the TV series and overlaps with some of the elements of Twin Peaks. It's his own beast that slightly overlaps, if that makes sense. And I think also the whole root of it is to find out how and what happened to the main character, whose name escapes me. I can't remember her name. Why can't I remember her name? Laura Palmer. So the premise of Twin Peaks is really Laura Palmer has been murdered in a quiet place called Twin Peaks, and Carl MacLachlan goes there to find out what happens, but along the way a lot happens. So Twin Peaks Fire Walk Me is trying to distill that down into what actually specifically happened to Laura Palmer, and it's an interesting one. Definitely an interesting one, and I really like it. Also, just say it was co-written by Mark Frost, who does have a huge input in the Twin Peaks story, so we mustn't forget him, but definitely David Lynch infused there. So then we're getting to Lost Highway. Again, not the most talked about David Lynch film, but what a great David Lynch film it is. Again, it's very difficult to give all these adjectives without repeating myself, but it is just a very surreal experience. Visually, the sound design, the music, and this is also where I'm going to mention Angelo Badalamenti, I hope I've said that right, who did the music for so many David Lynch films, and his music scores were beautiful. Sadly passed away as well now. So yeah, Lost Highway, great film. Bill Pullman's in it, Patricia Arquette, Balthazar Getty, Robert Blake, who's his final film. I can explain the premise, but it doesn't really matter. So Bill Pullman in it is I think he's a saxophonist, plays music, that's his profession, and he really just goes on a strange journey. I don't even want to give away the beginning because it is bizarre. It is bizarre, but it's fantastic film, and it's got a great song by David Bowie in it, who was in Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, has a little cameo in that. So interestingly, now the title does kind of give it away. David Lynch actually made a film where the story is a straight story, and the film is called A Straight Story, and it's really just a drama about a brother who, at the end of his life, let's say, goes on a road trip to see his brother, who they've been estranged, they've fallen out. I think it's set in rural part of America. He's like a farmer or a rancher or something, and he basically uses his tractor. He goes on his tractor, his little ride-on tractor, lawnmower thing, to see his brother before one of them passes away. I think it's his brother passing away. Anyway, it's a beautiful film. It's a simple film in a way. It's David Lynch's, on the face of it, simplest film, but it's just a beautiful drama. Again, you probably will be welling up at the end, or even earlier on. It's fantastic. I love that film. So beautiful. Well done, David. You did such a great job there. And if you remember my list of favourite films, Mulholland Drive was in there. And so you could go back and see what I felt about Mulholland Drive. And what I will say is it's, again, just a whole experience, absolutely mind-blowing. So many layers, so much to absorb, visually, musically. Has Naomi Watts in it, Justin Theroux, Laura Herring, Robert Forster. On the face of it, actually starts off kind of normal, about a woman who has a car accident and has amnesia, and she stumbles upon Naomi Watts' character, an aspiring actress, and they try to piece together what happened to her. Now that's just on the face of it. Of course, there's so much more to it that's not necessarily describable, let's say. You know, when we're talking about David Lynch films, we're talking really in the more almost abstract, impressionist, expressionism, whatever type of artistic style you want to give it. Really, it's the David Lynch style. That's what we should be talking about. And I think I mentioned in the previous video about my favourite films that it was originally a TV pilot that never got made into a series, and the footage basically sat there until Studio Canal or somebody decided they wanted to turn it into a film and then gave them more funding. Now, on the face of that, it doesn't seem like this is going to be a successful project, but it turned out to an extraordinary film. Love that film, it's so good. And then we get to his last actual feature film, Inland Empire. Now, I do literally like Inland Empire, but it's an interesting one where I feel that this became the point where he couldn't get the funding maybe for the films he wanted to make. Hollywood had clearly gone a certain route where there was less interest in this kind of filmmaking, or even less interest in this kind of filmmaking, and maybe the budgets just weren't there for him, or he just moved on to doing other things, music, his artwork, I don't know, and other stuff. But there is one little interesting thing about Inland Empire. It's actually shot on a handheld camera, or not handheld camera, an early digital camera. Really, I don't even think it's high definition. Nothing literally so unique about it. Other films, of course, bigger films have been shot on very early digital cameras of that era, around this era, maybe even earlier. I think Paul, the guy who did Leaving Las Vegas, I think he made a film with something like. Anyway, I digress. Inland Empire, again, just a trip, really, just an experience that you won't necessarily forget, and doesn't look like your traditional film. I quite liked it. I've liked it a lot, but compared to his previous work, not as good as far as I'm concerned. But it's still good. Still better than plenty of films you'll ever see, and worth the experience. And I think it has Laura Dern's in it, and I think Justin Theroux as well. So there you go. There's all of his films, and then we're going to come back to his swan song, which was Twin Peaks: The Return. And when this came out, people were very sniffy. I seem to remember they were like, "Oh, this isn't true Twin Peaks. This isn't what I came to watch. I want to see all the old characters." And it's a bit like the Fire Walk with Me situation. People didn't really go for it. However, I saw this and it blew my mind. It's just magnificent. It's arguably even better than the original Twin Peaks series. The sheer creativity, the imagination, I can't and won't even try and describe that. Just experience it. Just let it wash over you. It's not perfect. It's actually split into two series, really. So when they aired the first lot of episodes, about 6, it then had a break, and then they had a final 6. I can't remember how many there were, literally. 18 episodes, sorry. So 9 episodes each. Carl McLaughlin's in it, absolutely fantastic in it. Absolutely beautiful. Even when it's not at its best, when it's at its best, there's few things you will ever see as good as this. So I'm so pleased that he had such a great swan song in television and film with Twin Peaks: The Return, because I thought it was fantastic, and well done, David. So there we go. Sad that David is no longer with us, but his works will live on, and what a life to have led. And I'll leave you with a final anecdote about David Lynch. When he was very young and really on his artistic journey, and also down on his luck financially, before he had even made Eraserhead, he used to wander around, I think, Philadelphia, where he was living, and he'd wander around at night looking for bits of wood, bits of people had just dumped. And this was in the 70s. Philadelphia was crime-ridden, dangerous place to be, let alone at night, and particularly where he was. Anyway, one night he was walking along and he saw this piece of wood. He picked it up. It was a nice long piece of wood, and he thought, I could use this, maybe put it as a chair leg or a table leg or something. It probably was originally a table leg, or carve it into something. And anyway, he was walking along with this piece of wood, and suddenly he heard these sirens, and this police car stopped next to him. And the police car driver or whoever did down their window, and the policeman looked out of the window at him, and he said to him, "Good for you, buddy," and wound up the window, and they drove on. So there you go, fantastic little anecdote there about David Lynch. That doesn't sum up a surrealist moment about David Lynch. I don't know what does. So anyway, thank you for the work, David, and rest in peace. And we will leave the video there, I'd say. And obviously you can do the fake YouTube thing. You can like, you can comment, and you can subscribe. And a big thank you to Sean, my member who subscribed to my channel. And you can look at the membership in the description if you want to find out more. I've also now got it as a Patreon as well, so you can sign up to the Patreon if you want to support this channel, if you want a few little perks along the way, like early videos and having your name, like Sean, on the end screen. So you should be able to see that now if you haven't already. So have a good one. Thank you very much. See you next time.